All right, newest patch notes. I think these are the last patch notes before release, right? We have release April 30th. Let's get hype. Why haven't I been streaming? Dude, I got in Valorant super closed beta. First day, I've been playing the poopy out of that. It's a game by Riot Games, so I cannot be discriminatory, you know what I mean? We're going to be all up in the Valorant, we're going to be all up in the Runeterra, even more coming soon. Features the final card updates of open beta, including buffs to Draven, Katarina, Yasuo, plus tweaks to Expedition archetypes and some user interface improvements. Talked at the beginning of open beta about how we look at balance over the course of sets, including how we plan to approach our final card updates before the introduction of a new set. For this batch of changes, for launch, we focused on tying up loose ends with some clarity improvements, fairly minor nerfs, and a few champion adjustments. We expect champion health to be particularly important for us with the set transitions. We want players to be excited to try out the new, but also for existing champions to remain compelling options. We feel pretty good about where we're at, but we have a few changes aimed at increasing viability. While we're happy with where Noxus is as a region in terms of overall card usage, Noxian champions in general are somewhat underrepresented. So we've got adjustments to Draven and Katarina. Additionally, we've got a group of changes aimed at increasing clarity and generally helping cards act in more intuitive ways for both players. These changes will have some small level of impact on power level, but we've separated them into a different section below to make it clear what we're trying to accomplish. We plan to pretty actively tweak various expedition values. Our primary goal is that all archetypes feel viable, so you can make decisions based on the contents of the individual packs you're shown rather than a particular strategy being overpowered. At the moment, we think we're in a pretty good spot, so many of the changes in this patch focus on mixing things up a little and refining some archetypes to be more satisfying to play. I'd like to share a little more info on some of the concepts and tuning values you'll see mentioned in the changes below, and what we use to shape expeditions overall. Every combination of one or two regions has its own primary archetype, but we also have the capacity to support additional archetypes that are a bit more off the beaten path. Currently, these are Fluffed Tuft and Cataclysm, but we're adding another with this patch, Crimson Guard. Main thing to note is that these bonus archetypes only show up half as often as the primary archetypes during initial champion picks, so if you're interested in trying them out, take them when you see them. Some archetypes are full of generically useful cards, while others, like Shadows and Dust, consist of mostly cards that are dependent on one another. Cohesiveness rating is a tuning value that allows us to control how quickly a particular archetype will be disallowed from showing up in wild picks when your deck doesn't include any cards from that archetype, since you'd be highly unlikely to be interested in them anyway. So it sounds like they're tuning this rating for decks that... So it's like when you go into puffs, or when you go into poison puff caps, that's a very specific build, so it tunes how likely you are to see that poison puff archetype. I don't know if it's actually making it more or less likely. Wild pick bonus is another tuning value that allows us to increase the frequency with which you'll see an archetype during your wild packs, but only during draft where it's your primary archetype. So for an archetype like Shroom and Boom that's dependent on having plenty of mushroom-related cards to end up with a synergy deck, taking a couple packs from it early on will ensure you'll see lots more of them throughout the draft. There you go. That answers the question right there. And there's so much more coming in the next patch when expeditions will be updated to include the new set in 7th region. We'll add new primary archetypes for each of the new region pairings, so at least 7 more archetypes added to the current total of 24, bringing the mode to over 30. When you take tri-region into account, there will be 63 different region combinations. So within 2 weeks, we're going to have a new color. Cool. So they've also updated some champions. I'm not sure if they're nerfs or buffs. Looks like they're different so far. Draven now says I've struck with 2 total spinning axes instead of attacking twice with a spinning axe. So now you can evolve Draven on the same turn that you... It might have to be next turn. I don't know if you get the strike immediately. I think strike comes after, so you might have to actually attack once, and then the following turn you can do it all at once. Draven now levels up when striking with 2 axes at the same time. Create a fleeting Blade's Edge in hand. She gets an extra card whenever you play her now. We want to give Katarina a slight increase in versatility and usability while addressing a fundamental problem within her play pattern. Trying to use her early can be ineffective as her self-recall leaves you too far behind in the game. In addition to improving her resonance, her new ability should both up Katarina's power in her current decks and allow her to be played in a wider variety of strategies. So she recalls, she's got that bounce back thing where you can't kill her. Now, every time you play her, you also get more value out of that. Pretty cool. Hopefully it doesn't become oppressive, because Katarina's kind of annoying to deal with, because she bounces back, so you gotta hit her with spells. But it seems okay. I'm interested. Yasuo's health goes from 3 to 4, just up in durability, so now when you use him for the stun and recall, and then his evolved health is gone from 4 to 5. So he's just a little bit beefier. He's 1 stat line higher, so cards like the discard 1 to deal 3 damage no longer kills him outright. One toughness does make a pretty big difference. The difference between 1 and 2 in Runeterra is actually pretty significant. It's really tight numbers. The difference between 1 and 2 is a pretty big deal. In Hearthstone, the difference between 1 and 2 isn't as big of a... There are still those stat lines in Hearthstone where you're trying to play exactly around 1 card and be 1 health higher. So really, that in itself, being 1 health higher, changes the game entirely. We've seen Kallista's play rate skyrocket since her update last balance patch. We've observed that her power level is still a tad low. So it's that self-dying archetype. I want to play around with that. It seems pretty good now. So Laurent Duelist, his power goes from 3 to 4, giving things challenger. Okay, so this is a value trading card. It didn't value trade very well at 3, so they're seeing if it value trades better at 4. I know Bannerman was a top tier deck for the last couple weeks, so this is probably them just nerfing that. Demacia can have overpowering curves that leave certain strategies unable to compete. Bannerman is a key offender that also homogenizes Demacia decks diversity due to allegiance requirements. Right, so you want to basically go pure white when you run this. White Bannerman with, it was the Garen Bannerman, I remember. Blood for Blood has been ineffective even in Battle Scars decks. A cost reduction should help move it into a more usable state. Deal 1 to an allied follower. If it survives, create a copy of it in hand. For 2. 3 to 4 on K to the Arm. Playing the more expensive Noxus units, it can be risky for an aggro deck to try and play single large units before combat later in the game, as opposed to just playing more cheap units or spells that can be used during or after combat. And this, it's kind of like Magic, where they can just throw down a 1-1 and chump block. You could put down a 100-100, and if it doesn't have Overwhelm, they could just put down a 1-1. You could have spent all your mana on that, they just spent 1. Now it's even state, they have an entire turn to turn the tide at that point. Giving a health buff to K to the Arm is definitely a big deal. Deck buff, Ramp, and Yetis all got buffed. Okay. Same with the Trapper. Wording Stones is up to 4 health. Okay, puts it out of range of that 3 damage. So Wording Stones have been actually unplayable, basically. They're back to 4 health. Hopefully that is fine. Oh, Shady Character. Okay, so what this does is you could play Shady Character and then try to transform it. In response, they could Mystic Shot your Shady Character. Now they can't do that anymore. Now they could Mystic Shot, they could deal 1. There were tons of cards that answered it immediately. Now it's a much smaller set of cards that answer it. The Skitterer. This might be the best card in the game right now. Or it before it got nerfed, it just got nerfed from 3 to 2 health. It might have been the best card in the game before, when it was a 3-3. Skitterer's summon effect is potent in all stages of the game, and many strategies beyond just Spider or Fearsome decks have been utilizing the card to great effect, particularly more controlling Shadow Isles decks. Ultimately, the card's been a bit too ubiquitous, and a health reduction should generally rein in its strength, make it slightly less flexible defensive option. Exactly. It was good in everything. So, that's good news. Ezreal, they're probably watching him because he has like a one-shot combo. Inclines Ezreal decks towards what we call consumptive play patterns. Frostbite, you kill everything that they play, you keep the board clear, and then you play Ezreal, you level him up, and then you do stuff like Progress Day, you know? Draw 3 cards, make them all cost 1, just get a lot of super cheap spells in your hand, and then you just let it rip. It doesn't happen very often, so his win rate isn't very good right now. Lastly, what they did is something I absolutely love, that Hearthstone will never do, that Magic will never do, that really sets this game apart, in my opinion. That I'm just looking forward to this more than anything about this game. So, Bright Steel Formation, let's start with this one. It used to have barrier, and it also said player attack, give all allies barrier. So basically, you'd be getting barrier twice. And in most cases, that didn't matter. Barrier is Divine Shield. When you get hit, it goes away. It cancels all damage once. So having 2 stacks of it doesn't do anything. You get hit with that damage, they both go away. The thing about it is, Shen and Greenglade Caretaker, they're affected by how many barriers go away or are applied. So that is actually a slight nerf. This card no longer gives you 2 barriers for Shen decks. That being said, this is a much better way of doing things. So Lancer would rarely, not always, create an elite when it died under your control. So if you had a Swiftwing Lancer and you didn't play Demacia, this thing would die and not do anything, because your color doesn't have elites. Now, it creates a random elite, so you always get one. I think this actually happened to me once in a game. I remember being very confused in a lot of different cases, and this stuff is exactly what they're trying to address with that. Trifrarian Assessor. Updating to match our general approach to defaulting to when summoned versus play. Oh, okay, so if there's a card that tutors this out to the battlefield, it now draws, versus when you play it out of hand. That was the only way it did it before. So now you can tutor it out with different things, and it uses its ability. That's a big buff for this card, and it's much cooler. So the Shark Chariot. I've never actually seen this card. Okay. This changes a much-needed cleanup to Shark Chariot's functionality that leaves it with nearly identical play patterns. Okay, I thought so. Previously, it was the only card that would return to play after being dead. Now it revives, meaning it will instead make a copy of itself, which is much more consistent. Purify will work effectively on the Chariot by removing Last Breath. Oh, so it was dead? Okay, alright. So you could silence it, and then it would die, and then it wouldn't be silenced anymore because it was dead, and then an ephemeral ally would attack, and it would jump back in. So now it actually works correctly. You can silence this unit. Iceborne Legacy will now work effectively with Chariot. Revived copies will now gain the buff. Iceborne Legacy buffs a card plus all copies of it. This is the card, this revive mechanic makes it now a copy. So they buffed it in a lot of different ways. The only nerf to it is you can now silence it. They added some Expedition archetypes. They added Crimson Guards that pairs self-damaging effects for surviving damage, plus barriers. Oh, with barriers plus tough and regeneration. Yikes. Did you know that protecting Crimson Curator with a barrier counts as surviving damage? Now you do. They've tweaked each thing, so they removed some common cards from Discipline because it had too many. Noxian Might was too effective at overwhelming damage. Shroom and Boom. So each of these archetypes has their own cohesiveness rating, wild pick bonus chance, and all that stuff. So that's actually kind of cool. Alright, other than that, it's just some bug fixes and getting ready for release.